Welcome to the X-Men. X-Men, we have an emergency. Scott, get the Blackbird prepped for launch.
At the beginning, Kids WB wanted the focus of the show to be on the X-Men as younger characters, as teenagers, and that fit real well with actually the origin of the X-Men in the Marvel Comics. The whole concept of a mutant is a gene that has mutated and gives you a special power and ability, and the whole idea of mutating genes ties into the theory of evolution and how evolution works. The thing that Stan Lee did back in the 60s when he created a lot of these characters was to think, what would it be like if a normal person was suddenly given special abilities and powers like a superhero? Realistically, how would they behave? How would they react?
We spent a good deal of time to develop those characters so that they, in essence, become 3D. They become real.
And the idea of taking someone who's still young and still trying to find out who they are and still deals with all the issues that young people deal with, and then add to that the fact that now they're different. They have some special ability. Are they going to use it for good or ill? Is it going to solve all the rest of their problems? Of course it won't. And that's what made the characters interesting.
If we were to jump right into a band of superheroes out there saving the world, we wouldn't have gotten to know them as well as going through some of the struggles that they go through.
Ha! We showed him! We are the X-Men!
I don't fight your battles, so don't fight mine.
The more we thought about it, we more liked the idea that we want to see them where we most can relate to them and what it is to be a teen and dealing with the fact that you are slightly different.
By aging our characters down and reducing their level of skill or powers, we have a place to grow. We have Jean, who at the beginning of season 1 can rattle a chair and lift it up with some effort, and she's having trouble. As the episodes progress, she's soon able to lift bigger things and heavier things and throw things. We enjoy the fact that we have characters who are unsure of what they're capable of.
If we can create these characters out of paper and make our viewers actually feel for them, then, you know, we've accomplished a great deal.
Well, when we first started the show, the whole group wasn't there. We started at the beginning with just Scott and Jean and Professor X and the other adult characters, and then introduced them one by one.
I think the first 6 episodes are introductions of characters that once you get to know them and understand them, when you see them in adventures and crises, you feel for them. I mean, you understand exactly what they're going through.
It was a conscious decision to try and find a good blend of personalities, characters that would work well together and react differently in different situations, but it was also thinking in terms of their powers and abilities and visually what that would look like on screen.
By taking it out of the comics continuity, we were able to actually tell new stories.
We'll kind of use the original comic stories as a jumping off point. We use that as a starting point. A lot of times they'll do things in the comics that we can't do in a kid's show.
This is our opportunity to tell new stories with beloved characters.
Welcome home, old friend. We've missed you.
One of the original thoughts that I was trying to push forward was using the old Kirby, the yellow jumper on top of the black spandex look. And so that was kind of where we started. And then from there we started to play with it a little bit. We wanted to kind of start with a main uniform for all of them, and then we started to accessorize it considerably. We wanted to go for some geometry to their designs. Their legs are terribly long, and their torsos are very short, and we thought that was a nice design element.
And a lot of the characters did evolve over time, and there's a few that just kind of jumped out at you. Magneto was like one quick sketch, and he just flew through the new Magneto design. But there are others, you know, Kitty and Jane, that we just went through a lot of different things, and Rogue especially, you know. But ultimately, we got these really unique designs that are very unusual for Saturday morning style animation.
A lot of people first experience with the X-Men was through the previous animated series, or they read the comics and were a little different than the comics in some ways. And some of the differences are the choices of which characters were there at the beginning and how they joined and how they first got their powers. So we've had to play around with some of that stuff a little bit in this series, but I think the essence of what the X-Men were all about and everything, we're being pretty true to that.
So I don't think we compromised anything from the X-Men universe. On the contrary, I think we enlarged it.
You know, it is so thrilling to know that in the beginning I started the X-Men just as a comic book. And now today, these wonderful DVDs of the animated show are available. The way these characters come to life, you forget you're watching animation. To me, it's just a beautiful production. Inspirations for creating the X-Men was laziness. Now, the reason I say that, you know, in creating a superhero, you have to find a reason why he or she has a superpower. Well, I could only have so many people bitten by radioactive spiders or hit by gamma rays or whatever. And I was running out of ideas to give people superpowers. Then an inspiration struck me. What if I just said they were born that way? They were mutants. We know mutants exist in nature. Occasionally you see a five-legged frog or a pumpkin that's the size of a watermelon or whatever. So I figured I would create characters with superpowers, and I would just say they were mutants. They were born that way. So it was laziness and desperation, but it seems to have worked. Professor X, of course, he was the leader.
What you need, Hank, are students who know your secrets, who have secrets of their own, and who need a man of your compassion to teach them.
Here he was the most powerful of all, mentally, but physically he was the weakest. In fact, in writing the stories, it was always very difficult for me to figure out ways to handicap Professor X or to make it so that he couldn't use his power. I mean, if he met Magneto and Magneto tried to do something bad, he'd just get into his mind and change his mind. In fact, that's why I gave Magneto that idiot helmet he wears. I said something to the effect that the helmet shields him from Professor X's mind probe. See, I try to sound very scientific.
What are these guys? Ghosts?
Their weapons are real enough.
And I like Cyclops, of course. And I always thought of him as the assistant leader. If anything would happen to Professor X, he would be the guy who'd take over because he was the most competent of all of them. And I thought it was rather tragic that he had this great power. He could do almost anything with his eye beams, but he had to wear those glasses. And if he were involved in a romantic situation with a girl, she just couldn't take off his glasses and gaze into his baby blues. And to me, that was tragic. Having these beautiful baby blues of my own, you know, I can empathize with that. I had a character called the Beast. He was big and burly, and he looked like a big wrestler or something. But he was the most erudite and the most loquacious, and he'd use the most highfalutin language and everything. So he was a total contradiction, the way he looked and acted. And he's now an instructor at the school, which is what he always should have been, being about the brightest and most well-read of all of them.
Oh, boy.
Of all the characters, they were all pretty easy for me to come up with. One gave me a little bit of a problem. I knew we had to have a female, so I called her Marvel Girl. But I kept forgetting what her power was. I think it was telekinesis. I think she was able to move things mentally or control things mentally. And I kept forgetting as I'd be writing the story. Now, let me see. What is it that Marvel Girl does again? And now today, here's Marvel Girl again as Jean Grey.
Wolverine, we've sighted him in the scrapyard.
I really like calling her Jean Grey better. I mean, I must admit Marvel Girl was rather a corny name. But there are so many new characters now, like Nightcrawler. I did not create him, but he is a wonderful character.
I've been working out. Can you tell?
And I love the way in the animated series you've given him the ability to look normal when he's in school among the other kids, and then by touching whatever it is on his wrist, he can become the Nightcrawler again. And you know, how could I have forgotten to mention Wolverine?
I've tracked her to the docks. She's here, somewhere.
We're on our way.
Pardon me for not waiting.
That's my lasting regret that I didn't create Wolverine. I would have loved to be able to say he was my character. He's like a bomb waiting to go off. You know that underneath this exterior there's a raging, tormented personality who at any time might lose his temper and become the most dangerous guy on Earth. And what a great characteristic for a hero, because he's almost an anti-hero, which of course makes him the most fascinating of all the X-Men. I don't know if you're supposed to like a villain as much as a hero, but I've got to tell you, I love Magneto. He is one of my all-time favorite villains. In fact, I shouldn't say one of my all-time favorite villains, one of my all-time favorite characters. Now, the thing about Magneto that really fascinates me, I never thought of him as a bad guy, because he really thinks he's doing the right thing. In the beginning, he had no intention of hurting human beings, but when he learned that the humans resented these people with extra powers and were hunting them and hounding them and harassing them, and if I knew another word with H, I'd say that too, hating them, he felt he had to fight back. Funny thing, most people call him Magneto, and they ask me, what's the correct way? Well, there's no correct way. I call him Magneto, and maybe because I do it, that's the correct way, but you can call him what you want. So I find him a very complex and a very interesting character, and I'm very proud. I did create Magneto. When I meet people in the street, especially young people, one of the questions I'm always getting, if they had a fight, who would win? Cyclops or Wolverine? And what about Professor X and Magneto, if they had a go at it, and on and on. And it's great to hear that, because you know that these characters are interesting to the viewers and they're important to the viewers. And the best thing about it is so many people have told me that they get the symbolism of this oppressed minority and how terrible it is that people are intolerant of other people who have differences in some way. And I feel that if in doing an adventure series where it makes the reader stop and think, or maybe in some slight way will make the reader a more tolerant person, I think that that's a wonderful thing, and I'm very grateful for that. And I think as long as we get such beautifully depicted versions of the X-Men in animation, and as long as we get stories where they keep advancing and changing and growing, I think they'll just go on and on in the foreseeable future. And judging by the past, every year they seem to become more and more interesting, which is really a wonderful thing. And I will finish by saying, Excelsior!
Spread a little more sunshine, would you?
I'm a weather witch, not a snowplow.
It's like we were playing with fire and didn't even know it.
If there's anything those kids are used to doing, it's keeping their cool and keeping their secrets.
Okay, let's get on with it. Action!
You're gonna be Dracula? Cool. Well then, duh. I mean, yeah, sure. Of course I'm gonna totally try out.
X-Men may come across to most parents as like a TV series based in fiction, but that's not true at all. In each and every episode, we deal with issues that any average teenager, young kid can identify with.
The idea of having them as teenagers gives us the advantage of exploring a lot of issues that I think kids can relate to. That time of our lives is usually pretty pivotal. The pressures we feel with school and from other kids and trying to fit in, and then you throw into that mix the added burden of having these superpowers and abilities, and that creates a lot of good issues for storytelling.
We're approaching the character of the Blob. He's got a lot of human issues that a lot of kids have when they're in school, right? They're just looking for the people that they fit in with, and that's basically what Freddy's all about. He has this inner conflict, whether he's a good guy or if he's hanging out with kind of like the delinquent group.
The best storytelling always comes out of characters that you really care about and that seem real and that you can identify with, so that when they do go into action and they do get into dangerous situations, the concern that you feel as a viewer is more intense because you see them as real people.
Spot the flag? No. Pop up top and see if it's still there.
X-Men Evolution's script process is probably fairly unique. Ultimately, what worked best was to develop the stories in-house. We get in a room and we toss the stories around until we get something that we like. And that is a story that I then assign to a writer. Wolverine is definitely a writer's favorite, but we really are selective as to which stories we're going to devote to him, because he takes over. You know, when he's in an episode, that's who you're watching.
With Wolverine, it's not so much the voice as kind of discovering the character and finding out his issues. And, you know, it's just, there's a lot of anger in Wolverine.
Another character who gets pitched quite often is Nightcrawler, because he's a fun character. He's got a great power. People seem to want to come up with stories that deal with what he's going through.
We're really specific about the format and the formula. If all of the show is just action, it doesn't carry the same intensity and the same weight as if you have, you know, very compelling characters that you really care about. We want to have a variety in the stories. Some of them are going to be kind of dark, serious dramas. Some of them are going to be lighter. Some of them are even going to focus on the villains rather than the good guys and be told more from their perspective.
Traditionally, the episodes have an A and a B story. If it's an episode that's heavy on action, we like to have a B story that at least allows some laughs. If it's an episode that's more comedy-driven, we prefer to have a B story that gives us some action.
It gets kind of complicated, especially when you only have 22 minutes in which to construct all of these stories and to weave it all together.
It's been probably the biggest challenge for writers is to find that correct mix between the action and the drama.
A lot of the themes we deal with come out of good storytelling. And so you try and deal with issues that really come out of real life.
In season 1, we deal with unity and family and friendship and trust.
We don't sit down and consciously think, okay, it's time to learn this lesson this week and we'll do a show with that theme.
Those things could have taken your empty head right off!
I think we mostly try to think of what's a good, interesting story, and then as a result of that story, we sort of find what the issue and what the theme is going to be and make it part of how we tell that story.
Season 1 had 2 arcs. One was Magneto, what he was about. You heard that eerie magnetic hum. He saw metal objects floating in the air and his eyes lighting up from the darkness, and you knew he was there. The other continuity arc that season 1 was Rogue, and how when she was brought into the show, she was this certain type of flawed character with a major chip on her shoulder, and bringing her into the X-Men fold and what she has to go through in order to finally trust them. That arced over several episodes until finally she was a part of the team, and even then we kept her somewhat of an outsider.
It's getting kind of hard to tell the players without a scorecard around here.
She's tough, and she doesn't take any from anyone, and, you know, she's on her own track a lot of the time.
The The idea that we're all different, have different abilities, we have different backgrounds, we're from different races, that aspect of the show is kind of unique and kind of special about this series.
I'm going in.
Wanted to make it very feature-esque in its presentation.
We were trying to go for something that was very distinctive without doing something that we'd seen before.
We wanted to give it a look of its own.
Let's move.
At the early stage of the process, we tried a lot of different approaches. I did some artwork, I did drawings. Our character designer, Steve Gordon, did a lot of designs.
We would have to relate it somewhat to the comics, but we felt that we could probably start fresh.
Some of the Marvel folks in New York even contributed some designs, and all of this material was gone over by the network and Avi and the folks at Marvel.
As soon as Boyd started sending sketches in, it was pretty clear that this is the way to go.
We made a conscious decision to go with a kind of a long, lean look on the character. It's very stylized.
We knew that we were going to have silhouettes that had strength to them, but we also knew that since we were going with black as an overall design element, we weren't going to have a lot of interior detail on their muscles and so forth. And so we were going for a streamlined look, a simple line. We wanted to do a straights against curve concept on their design, where you always had a straight line working against a curved line. That is kind of a design element in animation that gives a certain strength to it.
Whoa! Easy on the exquisite costume, mein Freund.
There's been so many different versions of the X-Men costumes over the years. There's been a lot of different variations on it. We kind of came up with this idea of having a core base color.
We wanted to keep the costumes functional. We didn't really design them to be individual taste at this point because they're more like school workout uniforms. These are things that they train in. It's not like they've discovered their identity yet.
And then the accessories on top of that each character wore were distinctive for each character.
We wanted to put a certain unique feature on each of them that would just add a little bit of personality.
Far out, man! Oh, I swear, that homie's lingo is so whack!
The color motifs are somewhat based on the traditional comic book colors, where Jean has green incorporated in her costume, and Kitty has light blue, Rogue has a dark green, Cyclops has got a lot of yellow in his costume. And, obviously we tried to incorporate X's throughout most of them, on shoulder pads and belt buckles and so forth.
But it's that black or dark gray base that's consistent in all of them that makes them look like a team.
That's it, I'm out of here. Ah! Why don't you stick around for a while?
When we've designed the characters and we have a pretty good idea of how they look, and then we want to do tests to see how they should move. We used one of our directors and a great animator, Steve Gordon, who also designed the characters, to do tests of these characters doing walks and runs, and in some cases utilizing their powers.
For all the main characters, we came up with walk cycles and sometimes run cycles, depending on the character. Some of the girls would swing their hips, and some would swing them more than others, and some would walk a little more straight-legged. Wolverine, we gave more of a stalking attitude towards when he was in his Wolverine costume. And when he was Logan, we gave him more of a loping look, like he didn't care. He had his hands in his pocket type of attitude.
Now mind your manners.
Obviously Nightcrawler was very specific. We had to come up with a run for him where he needed to run like a cat, and a walk cycle for him where he would walk on his feet, which was very different than what you're used to seeing in animation. But we tried to come up with something different for each of them.
I'm really proud of the fact that I think, for the most part, almost every episode in this series is really high quality. It's good storytelling, the animation's great, the art is good to look at. I'm really proud of the quality of the show and how good it is.
We wanted to make an attractive show. That was the whole idea.
Are you ready?
I've been going into meltdown here. All covered up like this. I hate it.
I'm strong. I'm agile. I got this killer tongue. How could I be left behind? Twice.
Hey, what's the stitch? I thought we were Hawaii bound.
Charles, there's something in my head.
How about you get inside and see if you can pry it loose?
Look, whatever they did to you, you're fighting it. You can win.
Well, as far as I can determine, Magneto's on the loose again.
Nobody discards me. Even Magneto. Understand?
When you're casting a show like this, we usually have auditions.
Okay, they're auditioning for a new X-Men thing.
You look at a character like Wolverine and who he is and what he does, and you say, well, we need a guy with sort of a gruff sound.
Yeah, easy for you to say.
Hi, my name's Scott McNeil, and I play Wolverine, a.k.a. Logan on X-Men Evolution. People are just like, man, you're Wolverine, man. He is a very real character. His role in this is not so much always just out there, you know. Don't make me angry.
Are you okay?
I think there's a lot more of Wolverine's humanness. It makes it interesting to play.
With the Professor X, you want somebody who sounds very controlled.
Mystique may very well be the boy's mother, but we may never know the truth now.
My name is David Kane. I play Professor Charles Xavier at the Xavier Institute for Gifted Students.
You must have absorbed the memories of someone who indeed knows about Kurt's past.
It was kind of a cool audition because I collected Marvel Comics like everybody did. X-Men, of course, is one of my favorite, and I got the call. So I was like, yes, X-Men, yeah. So it was a week I was on this, you know, this high.
Get him!
Sometimes you don't have any preconceptions as to how a character should sound. And then from the audition, somebody comes in and does something that's just really different than what you would have ever imagined, but it's wonderful, and everybody's just really impressed by it.
I'm Noel Fisher, and I play Toad in X-Men.
If you're still here, then that means you're a loser too.
He's all scratchy and cool and like hopping around and slurping and eating like flies and stuff. Yeah. All the slurps are done by me. I gotta go. It's a lot of fun.
Knock, knock. My name's Colleen Wheeler, and I play the voice for Mystique on X-Men Evolution. I shouldn't even have to prove myself to him. They wanted someone with a low voice, and I seemed to hit that for them, so they liked it, and I got the role. Get out! Get out now! I'm really a nice person, honestly.
Hi, I'm Michael Dobson, and I play the Blob.
I am the Blob!
When we were first approaching the character of the Blob, it was really important to make sure that it came across as not being the quintessential bully. We realized that inside there is somebody who's looking basically to be understood and fit in somewhere.
Yuck, Blob, I totally need a shower now. My name is Maggie Blue O'Hara, and I play Kitty Pryde, Shadow Cat. I wouldn't. He's been acting mega weird all morning. We just rolled with what kind of voice I already had, which was young and bubbly, and the way that she was written was quite enthusiastic, and so I just used my own style, and they seemed to like what I already had. Do you really want to hurt me, Mr. Logan? Kitty's a cool girl, and so am I.
I really do know what you're going through. We'll both keep looking, and we'll find our answers together someday. My name is Megan Black, and I play Rogue. Rogue has a lot of attitude. She's my favorite character, because she can absorb everybody's power. I can be a tough, big guy in my little rogue body. She rocks.
What if some of us don't like the festering boils?
You could, deal with it.
Neil Dennis, I play Spike. He's got much different powers than anything people have usually seen before, as in bone protrusions, kind of like the armadillo effect.
Still think I'm being dramatic?
In the recording sessions, it's interesting to see the transformations that people go through.
It's very much like being a kid.
Voice actors especially are really crazy for some reason.
I will kill you!
I mean, that's one seriously disturbed lady. A bunch of schizophrenic in one room.
Slave away in front of a hot microphone all day.
Okay. Basically, you get to play for like hours on end with all the other people that are in there because everybody's so much fun.
Oh yeah, this thing cooks.
Yes, my friend, it's hard, hot, sweaty work.
Come here often?
It's like school days again, man. I'm really sorry, but it is.
We usually don't have a lot of time in these recording sessions. We got to get busy pretty quickly and get down to work.
It's over.
That's another important part of the voice director's job is to get them all under control.
You're going through everything in real time. You're reading through the script like a radio play. And if the actors are getting it and everything's falling together, that's great.
That was great, you know. I also love that. That was perfect. We're just going to change the one thing and move on.
If they start to stray or if they're not quite getting it right.
You know what, you guys? That totally sucked. We're going to do it again, do it a different way. It's like, okay, cool.
And you're staying behind!
He always allows the sessions to be a lot of fun because it's got to be. I mean, we're doing cartoons, man. It's got to be fun.
So it's nice to be able to just work with all those, you know, all those talents.
I thought something stunk about this forest.
And the fight scenes are great. I mean, they're Gestalt therapy. All that just like...
I'm punching in the air, or if you're falling, your arms are moving.
You look over and someone will be going like,
Part of the job.
You sure this isn't gonna hurt? You know, you forget that you're working sometimes. It's awesome.
X-Men. Go love that.
Shit!
I was just telling Kurt how I set up this institute for gifted youngsters.
We wanted to set up the fact that there was an Xavier Institute, that Professor X was in the process of recruiting other mutant kids to come to his institute and be under his guidance. We also wanted to set up the fact that in our series, the kids went to a normal high school. A big part of the premise of this show is their acceptance into society. And it was always a goal of Professor X's to get these kids in a place where they would be accepted. If they're only at his school, then it's kind of hard to convey that message.
I think it's important to start off a series like this when you have such a very large cast, is to start the cast small. Strategy X does that, starts very small.
In the X-Men mythos from the comics, Jean and Scott were the first two recruits of Xavier. We knew that we wanted Jean to be Miss Popular. Scott was a little more of the quiet, loner type of guy, and he obviously liked Jean.
We get to meet one of the fans' favorite characters, Nightcrawler.
He's very reclusive, very self-conscious about his appearance. He has to be because of the ridicule that he would face.
Whoa!
We also introduced some of our villains. We introduced Mystique as the principal of the school. She's recruiting the guys for her side of the team at the same time as Xavier's recruiting his.
What we try to do with each of our villains when we introduce them is set them in a sympathetic manner.
Toad is the mutant we focus on here as a person that Mystique is working with to try and get him inside of Xavier's school so she can have him do some scouting there for her. We also wanted to not have it be too dark and negative because the theme of the X-Men is basically prejudice and hatred and people mistrusting these mutants.
Normal is what you truly are. Never think otherwise.
Yes, there was the tension and the conflict, but we wanted to lighten it up with some humor and some fun stuff, too. And Toad worked really well for that. He's always great for comedy relief.
We really get to take this huge Marvel universe of characters and put them into a little high school and try to tell compelling stories. They were just going to be stories that were important to our characters and therefore important to our viewers.
In the X-Impulse, we are introducing Kitty Pryde as the newest recruit. She's having a nightmare, and she wakes up and finds out she's actually in the basement. She's phased right through the bed and through the floor and has no idea how she got there. It's a real traumatic experience for her.
What am I? What's happening to me?
Just as kids normally in the real world deal with peer pressure. In this episode, you have Lance, who's trying to influence Kitty one way for his own purposes, and then Jean is there along with Xavier, and Jean is trying to talk to Kitty and influence her in another way.
One of the things about Kitty's characterization early on was you'll see a change from kind of the Valley Girl talk.
You, don't know anything, and neither does that creepy guy out there.
By the time the first season was over, we realized, I think it's better to de-emphasize some of that. So you'll notice she doesn't talk like that in the second season. But in the first season, that was her character portrayal.
We knew that Wolverine is probably the most popular character in the X-Men universe with most kids, so we wanted to look for opportunities to give him screen time. And Sabretooth has always been sort of his nemesis.
The battle between Wolverine and Sabretooth was an interesting exercise in the working relationship between the writer and the director.
Bring it on, Pops. Bring it on.
The script actually had them fighting more around town, and I decided to keep them in this parking structure where we could have a nice little battle where they're throwing cars at each other.
So suddenly here's Sabretooth taking, huge cars and ramming them up through the level to the next level. I was thrilled when I saw that. I think that's exactly the way this series should be.
Rogue is kind of a favorite character, so I was happy to be able to direct her first episode. This is a character who can't touch anyone, is afraid of people, so it was kind of fun to play with that element of her.
When we were creating our version of Rogue, we were trying to think logically what kind of a personality type would that lead her to become. And that led us to making her goth, where she dresses and behaves and acts as if she doesn't want to fit in.
It's great drama to see a character like that torn, and we get to see her very torn, and we get to see her being manipulated, and which makes her a very sympathetic character. So as unlikable of a character she could be, you like her because she's being used.
You won't hurt her, will you? After all, Raven, she's your...
I know, Irene.
That idea came from the comics as well. I think in the original story of Rogue, she is portrayed as the adopted daughter of Mystique, and she's raised by Mystique to be evil. We didn't want to make it quite that dark. We didn't want to keep her bad for a long time. We knew we wanted her to end up on the good side. We portrayed it in this episode as if she's just being deceived by Mystique.
You just cannot wait for her eyes to be open and to realize she's on the wrong side. Get with the X-Men, it's where you belong.
You can reach me anytime with this communicator.
The final confrontation between her and the other X-Men was visually one of the most exciting things we'd done up to that point in the series. We kind of set up an interesting dynamic here where Magneto's the guy behind the curtain calling all the shots, influencing Mystique, and she's working for him.
Magneto had this great theme music that Will Anderson developed, so that whenever you heard it, it almost made the hair stand up on your arms. Hearing his magnetic hum and seeing things like paper clips and staplers floating around the office, it was very chilling. He was obviously very powerful. Waiting to see what he was about, I think, helped propel the viewers through the first season. Mutant Crush is a great episode for introducing a character like Blob.
The Blob was actually one of my favorite characters. I think everybody sympathizes with the Blob.
The misunderstood kind of guy that has been the butt of way too many jokes.
If you laugh at the Blob, you're just stepping into a pile of trouble.
It's very easy to create a guy who's just nothing but brute strength and, not too bright upstairs, and to turn him into a caricature. But he's never had a friend before. And suddenly, for the first time, he's found a friend in Jean Grey, and he didn't know how to react to it. With that knowledge in mind, when you watch him in further episodes, you understand who that character is, and you care about what happens to them.
No one's ever been nice to Fred before. Like many lonely guys, when an attractive female is friendly to them, their hopes get a little too high, and they take things maybe a little too far. In this case, he definitely takes things very too far, which of course gets the X-Men in on things, and that's off a chain of events that lead into the battle royale with the Blob.
We wanted to show the idea that the powers would be evolving, and that Jean's abilities in this episode, she wasn't as strong as she's portrayed later. She's got the ability to move things with her mind and to use her telekinesis, but not to the extent that she could free herself. In the later episodes, her power evolves, and she could have gotten out of that situation easily. So that's intentional. We wanted to show this evolution of power. In Speed and Spike, we're introducing a brand new character to the X-Men universe. That's Evan Daniels. He's the nephew of Storm.
Bless you.
He's a character that was created specifically for our series. We thought we were creating something really unique, and then after we created him, of course, the fans pointed out to us that he has the same powers as another character called Marrow, but that was very unintentional. We didn't do that on purpose. It just sort of turned out that way.
It was refreshing to write for Spike, actually, because we didn't have to please anybody who might remember a different version of that character.
Anyone messes with me?
With Spike, we wanted to introduce the urban kid. He doesn't need this Xavier school. He resists the efforts of his aunt and the other X-Men to join up.
I like it right here, and I'm not going to some home for freaks.
As opposed to Kitty and Nightcrawler and others that we've introduced for whom their mutant power was a traumatic experience, he thinks it's cool.
You want to play tonight? The Spike Man is ready.
We're also introducing Quicksilver as sort of his nemesis. Quicksilver's a regular. He exists in the comics. Pietro's jealous of the fact that Evan's getting a lot of attention as the star of the basketball team, because he knows that with his mutant ability, his super speed, he could win easily and he could run circles around everyone. But he's been told to hold back and not use his power in public.
It was fun getting to do a character like Quicksilver, coming up with ideas for him to be zipping around town, and he tears up the street and causes this whirlwind, and cars are flying, and more destruction and cars flying into cameras, so that was good too.
Too slow.
The way the animators handled Pietro's super speed in this series is really, really great. Since this series is done with digital ink and paint, we can add such things as motion blurs. The motion blur comes across really effectively in conveying the idea of how fast he is and how quickly he can move around.
We always made an effort in the network meetings to figure out, can we have a special episode? And Forge was one of those ideas. Let's bring him in. He's a well-liked character in the comics.
A guy who's a genius, a brilliant inventor, and as a young student, he got himself into trouble by creating a device that sent him into another dimension, and he just disappeared.
So this was kind of a departure from our normal continuity of the series. We established a pocket dimension. We have a kid that's been trapped in there since 1978, and those are just elements that you don't normally see in X-Men Evolution, but I think it came out well because it's kind of fascinating.
Because of Nightcrawler's ability to teleport, he seemed like a logical character to put the focus on and to have him teleported by accident into this strange dimension that Forge has created.
Middleverse was just kind of a fun episode, more of a lighthearted episode where we just got to play with Kurt. He's always a fun character because we know we can go a little lighter on him.
Even though these X-Men get along very well, there's still, as in any family, because there's going to be these conflicts. And so we kind of played off of the idea that Scott is uptight, whereas Nightcrawler, Kurt, is much more of a prankster and just wants to have fun. So we use that sort of conflict between these guys and their personalities as a jumping off point to tell this story. In Turn of the Rogue, we finally bring Rogue around to realize that Mystique has been deceiving her, and she joins the X-Men.
I think Rogue has a lot of dimension. She's a very confused girl. She's put in a position of where to place her trust. Obviously, the subtext is trust in this episode, and who to trust, and repercussions of trusting the wrong people.
Also in this story, we were able to develop a little bit more the idea that Rogue does have a crush on Scott. And she feels particularly hurt and betrayed when Mystique tells her that Scott and the other X-Men are in training sessions to figure out ways to fight against her.
Gotcha!
In the comics, Mystique, I believe, did not change into animal form. She just changed into other humanoid forms. For us, it was more of a visual thing. It's the kind of thing that it creates a lot more opportunities of what we can do with her, the kind of deception she's able to pull off. And visually, in animation, it's an exciting, more interesting way to present her with her powers. Also in this episode is the first time we see Magneto actually come face-to-face with Xavier and confront him. We imply that there is a long-term relationship here, that these guys have known each other before, and that they have a very different philosophy on how to deal with the mutant powers and the way that the rest of humanity is going to react to them. By having the X-Men in a public school and in situations in the public where they have to use their powers for various reasons, it creates this interesting tension. In this show, Scott has to use his power to save the bus from going over the cliff, but he tries to do it without being noticed. But that's an ongoing theme that we play with throughout this series. Do I use my powers, or do I worry more about being discovered? And so it's a tension that always exists for these guys.
Spycam allowed us to get a unique point of view on the daily life of our characters, which I always found fascinating. What do they do when they're not in the danger room?
The fact that he has videotaped a lot of the X-Men, and Sabretooth gets a hold of it, he's able to find out where Wolverine is and goes after him. In the episodes prior to this, Sabretooth was a B type of character. He was in the peripheral story. We implied that there's this ongoing grudge match between him and Wolverine. So in this episode, he became the focus. He's the main villain, and his attack on the Institute and against Wolverine got played out to a much greater degree here than we were able to do in previous episodes.
The funnest part of Spycam actually didn't really involve Spike. It was basically him taking pictures of Kitty trying to teach Rogue how to dance.
And Kitty's a really good dancer, and Rogue is not. So it's sort of a fun little way to use her powers. Instead of it being a terrible traumatic thing, she's able to just touch Kitty very briefly and absorb some of her dancing ability.
We did step a little bit out of our rule book at the end of that episode, where Rogue absorbs the power of Sabretooth and actually grows pointy ears and long hair and hair on her legs. The rule of Rogue is she just absorbs their mutant power, not their physicality. Anyway, a lot of the fans pointed out to us, the fact that we broke our own rule there. Survival of the Fittest, I think, is a fan favorite for several different reasons. One is Juggernaut is a very popular character, and it was great to unleash him on the Institute and basically just be unable to stop this guy. What gave it its weight was his relationship with Charles Xavier.
Everybody has an evil twin in the world of comic books, and the Juggernaut is Xavier's evil twin.
So it was more than just kind of a mindless guy going on a rampage. It was a guy who felt cheated out of everything that Charles Xavier got.
Lay out the welcome mat, brother. I'm coming home.
I think the director, Gary, did a great job in how he set up all the efforts that Mystique had to go through just to get into that place, to free Juggernaut, as to how dangerous this guy was, and all the security that he's being kept under.
And Juggernaut tosses her aside, and he's a fun character because he's just unstoppable.
One of the other reasons why I think fans like this episode is, for the first time, we paired the Brotherhood, the X-Men, together to fight a common cause.
It was kind of fun to see the way they took on Juggernaut and worked as a unit to get his helmet off and make him vulnerable so that Xavier could use his power to take him down. In Shadowed Past, we really kind of changed gears with the tone of the show. We were drawing on the old classic horror films to a large extent here, with the castle out in the middle of the wilderness, Mystique fleeing from the castle with the baby. Even the imagery of the lab, where who knows what kind of work has been going on there with Magneto and the experiments that Mystique was so distraught about.
Monster! What have you done to him?
The reason why we wanted to keep it somewhat vague is because we were basically stating something that hadn't been true in the comics. There's a scene where Mystique is carrying him, and I believe in the comics she actually throws him over a bridge. We're not going to do that on a Saturday morning cartoon.
Despite the fact that Kurt tends to be very carefree, we wanted to show he had another side, that he was only carefree on the surface and that there were problems that plagued him.
Magneto experimented on him when he was a baby and triggered his X gene early on.
We also wanted to show that Mystique was something more than just a one-dimensional villain.
As a mother, she has feelings for Kurt, and that she's obviously very torn by the fact that she was not able to raise him and was forced to abandon him.
Get out of here, all of you! No can do, boss lady. We got higher orders.
The other thing that we introduce in this story is the idea that Pietro is basically spying for his father, Magneto, without Mystique's knowledge. Magneto has his own motives and his own plans that go beyond whatever Mystique thinks she's up to. Wolverine is having flashbacks and remembering some hidden part of his subconscious of the time when he was experimented on and was given his claws and his adamantium skeleton. He tries to find out what the source of this nightmare is and learns a little bit more about how he became Wolverine and who did this to him.
It's revered ground that we were treading on to start going into the whole Weapon X history.
The idea of getting into Wolverine's origin and his past, that's always been good stuff. It's always been really popular in the comics.
Definitely felt pressure on making sure we didn't mess this up.
You get into the Weapon X project, you get into the evil doctors.
The evil doctor who's did the experiment on him has planted this chip in his brain that he's activated, and it's drawing him back home again. So when Kitty and Kurt can see that, you know, he's not himself and he's not behaving normally, they tag along and help him out.
Another big Sabretooth episode, big fight with Sabretooth. Just a lot of fun little bits and pieces for you know, any true X-Man fan.
In this episode, Kitty plays the key role. She's at the risk of her own life, willing to confront him and help him and try and get through to him.
It's me, Kitty. Remember? Half pint?
He's basically trying to do away with her. And so she's using everything she can to outsmart Wolverine and try to bring him back, you know, into his senses away from the power of the evil doctor. And in the course of doing this, there's just a tremendous amount of emotions coming out for some of these characters that is very uncommon in this type of a cartoon.
Throughout the series, Magneto's pretty much been in the background, and you haven't known what he's all about, what his plans are. And so in this season finale, we sort of bring him out to the forefront, and he's the big bad guy, and we get a better idea of what he's been up to. I was really impressed with the animation on this episode. I mean, visually, I think there's just some beautiful stuff going on here.
We got to see all of them in action. We got to see everybody doing what they've been trained to do. We got to see a betrayal between Magneto and Mystique.
Scott's past and how he gained his abilities was a story we hadn't been able to tell because he was already there at the beginning, both he and Jean. This backstory was a way to introduce that all. When Scott finds out that his brother's still alive, obviously, I mean, it's very exciting. He thinks his brother's been dead for years and years, and we find out that he was raised as an orphan, so it's a really powerful moment when the two of them come together.
Scott Summers has always been a straight arrow, and Alex clearly is not. I mean, he's a guy who's raised on the beach and would prefer to be out floating on a surfboard, and then suddenly he's being labeled a mutant. I mean, this is a world that he just did not want.
Alex, when he's approached by Magneto, he hasn't had the experiences that Scott has had. He doesn't know who this Magneto guy is. He's meeting him for the first time, whereas Scott has a little more experience to draw from and reason to be more mistrustful, but Alex is kind of pulled in by the things that Magneto says he has to offer.
Part 2 of The Cauldron was fun because I enjoyed working with Scott and his brother Alex. You know, I liked that relationship and the fact that they'd lost touch and they were rediscovering one another.
The thing we're trying to set up here is that even a character as straight and as usually clear-headed as Scott can be influenced. I think it's a combination of the fact that his brother, who he hasn't seen for so long, is making a convincing argument why he thinks Magneto ought to be trusted, and that he doesn't want to go against his brother because he's just been rejoined to him for the first time in many, many years. But the other thing, I think, is that in the case of both Alex and Scott in particular, is his power is a handicap. And Magneto's promising both he and Alex that he can remove those handicaps. that he can allow them to have it under control. So it's a real powerful temptation that he's offering.
Go on, Scott. Show us the color of your eyes.
We didn't end this as a cliffhanger in that sense. We left it a little bit up in the air as to who had survived when the asteroid was destroyed, whether Magneto had made it out, whether Mystique had made it out. We inferred that they did. We showed that the Brotherhood had all survived. They still weren't all that keen on where they were going to go next and whether they were going to hook up with the X-Men or not, whether they fit in with them, because they'd basically just lost their leaders. They'd lost Mystique and Magneto, and so they're out there just sort of loose and, well, what are we going to do next? But the X-Men were all united with Professor X at their head and ready to take on whatever came next. When the comic was first created in the 60s by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the X-Men were youngsters. They were in high school. Similarly with Spider-Man, he was in high school when he first got his powers. And it's an interesting idea because a lot of the things these guys deal with as mutants is similar to teen issues. This is all kind of a metaphor for going through changes and finding out that you're different and finding social acceptance. And it's just exaggerated with these guys because of their abilities and the fears that they have that they're going to be discovered by the other kids with these powers and abilities. What we've done with the Scott and Jean thing is to kind of make it exciting and interesting and fun by sort of teasing the whole thing. We didn't want to just jump right into it. We've gone back to the beginnings here with the X-Men and how everything started. And it seems like as soon as the relationship is working and comes together, then it's no longer interesting and fun and dramatic. So we kind of keep these guys wondering if they're going to get together or not. And Scott's obviously been interested in Jean from the beginning, and she's got this other guy in her life, Duncan Matthews, and he's sort of an antagonist in this show for Scott, a competitor for Jean and her attentions. We have a lot of fun playing with these tensions and this attraction that you can see that they both feel, but Jean's a little reluctant to want to jump into that. This is an exciting episode where we focused on one of our new recruits, Tabitha, who is also known as Boom Boom because of her power. In the first season, we always wanted our bad guys to have a female amongst them, and she was our villainess of choice, but it never worked out for various reasons, so we introduced her in this season as one of the new recruits with the X-Men. She kind of represents our team who has a troubled past, and this episode we learn more about that. She doesn't quite fit in with the regimented lifestyle that most of the X-Men and the kids are used to. She's a free spirit and kind of ends up at the end of this episode going out on her own and eventually bunking with the Brotherhood. Fun and games. The professor has been called away on an emergency involving Juggernaut, and the kids are left to their own devices there at the mansion. And they all decide to throw this party and invite their friends. And Scott and Jean are supposed to be the responsible older kids that are left in charge. They're tricked by the younger kids and abandoned out in the hills. And so we get more exciting Scott-Jean moments together where they're accusing each other of setting this thing up. I like this episode a lot because it has a nice blend of fun and action and character and personality stuff.
The first season was the gathering. You know, it's the beginning. Mutants are popping up more and more, and they need to have a safe place where they can learn about each other and develop their skills and grow up safely.
There were moments in the first season that I thought were very strong, but the second season, I think we really hit a stride.
Season 2 was a real turning point, and it was the moment where a lot of things came together.
From this point on, this is an entirely new series. We had a lot of threads going. We wanted to bring them all into one cohesive storyline. Quite honestly, it was one of the hardest puzzles to put together because it is a very complex story.
We were having a lot of fun with sort of planting seeds all along the way that we could bring all together in our big finale and pay it all off. We knew we always wanted to introduce Wanda because she's part of the comic book family of Magneto, being his daughter, and Pietro, Quicksilver's sister.
Hey, you two need some serious family counseling.
We kept trying to think, what can we do with this character that's gonna give her an edge and make her really interesting? We kind of hit on this idea that her powers were just completely out of control, and that her father had actually committed her to this asylum.
This girl who's been locked in a mental institution for her entire life, from 6 until 16. This poor girl's been tortured. She's wrapped in straitjackets, and it takes 15 guys to get her out of her room. It's powerful stuff.
Wanda becomes a very central part of the Brotherhood team because, one, she brings as much of a hatred for Magneto as Mystique has, and two, she is so powerful. She basically kicks the rear ends of the entire X-Men team.
He's no good, Scott. We can't stop her. She's too strong. We've got to retreat.
She was the perfect weapon. Twist that hatred, bend it to become a weapon to destroy the X-Men, and then to ultimately seek her revenge to destroy Magneto.
Magneto had initially started off with the Brotherhood, and then he realized they just weren't cutting it.
Magneto needed at that point a new crew.
So he's assembled his new team, the Acolytes, and this was the perfect opportunity for us to reveal them in a very dramatic way. These silver orbs are coming out of the sky. They're landing. They open up, steam is coming out. You see the first one. Out comes Sabretooth. Suddenly in the foreground, there's a deck of cards. Can only be one person. It's Gambit.
The cry for Gambit was deafening. You know, people wanted to see Gambit. Have to have Gambit.
Pan over to see flames taking on a fiery face. It's Pyro.
This guy was a little crazy. He's got kind of a wide-eyed stare, and his hair's a little wilder than a normal character, and plus we wanted to give him the orange and yellow colors that signified fire.
And then out steps a huge, hulking Russian teenager, Colossus.
When it came to choosing who would be interesting to have as part of his group, we thought we would sort of turn a few things on their heads from the normal comic mythos, and so we picked a couple of characters that were actually part of the X-Men in the original stories.
It worked for Magneto, for him to have a new batch of villains that could really step up. They were older than our X-Men, only by a couple of years, but it made a big difference.
And it's one of the more memorable moments, I think, of the entire series, is the unveiling of this new team.
Another thought that we had at the beginning of the season is a way to work the Sentinels into our show.
I've created a prototype designed to defend mankind against the mutant threat, the Sentinel.
The Sentinels were always a big part of the whole anti-mutant thing in the comics, and visually they're great. They're basically giant Terminators for mutants.
Wolverine, unfortunately, has the honor of being the first victim to fight the Sentinel. He does a nice job, but ultimately he's taken out.
When this big robot is brought up into light and you see it, and it's very powerful, and it's taking all of the X-Men and all of their abilities to try to take it down.
And the X-Men are young. They're not real seasoned fighters, and they're still learning how to deal with these big threats. And so when they come up against this thing, it's like nothing they've ever faced before. And so it's a serious thing that they have to figure out how to deal with. Mystique felt used and betrayed by Magneto by the end of the first season. She decided to go a little freelance here, and she had her own agenda.
Now I'm forced to make my move.
A big part of her plot was to use her shape-shifting ability to infiltrate the X-Men so that she could use the power and the resources of the X-Men as a tool to go back and fight Magneto.
When I downloaded Xavier's files from Cerebro, I found a complete psychological profile from his sessions with Wanda. She'll do what's needed because I can give her the one thing she wants most: revenge.
And Magneto didn't see that coming. So, in a way, it made an interesting sort of wild card out there for us to play around with.
What you don't know through Hex Factor till the end of Day of Reckoning is that it's not really Xavier. In the Hex Factor, Mystique helps Wanda escape, and then she's heading back inside, turns into a guard and says, I've got something else to attend to. You don't know what that is until 4 episodes later.
In those last 2 episodes, you see Xavier being very heated with the X-Men, which you never see.
You rushed him? Like you were going to take him by surprise?
Professor,
Magneto is always 2 steps ahead, Scott.
And he's having Jean use Cerebro, and that's his device.
So we had to be very careful about showing the Professor doing things that Mystique was really unable to do in her disguise as him. Every time he needed to talk to the group, we had him entering the scenes. He entered the kitchen and told Scott, we need to gather everybody. Normally, he would have done that telepathically.
The nice thing is most people didn't figure that out. And it was a pretty cool moment where you see Scott take Jean's arms off of him, and he walks over and he grabs Xavier by the shirt, picks him up out of his wheelchair, and throws him on the ground. You're like, he's gone crazy! And then he stands up, and then it's Mystique. It just shows how in danger everything is, and they are.
And now things are about to get much worse.
Mystique has blown up the mansion in the hopes of destroying every New Mutant. Magneto has shown the whole world that we exist, and the government have many of our X-Men and some of the Brotherhood in their clutches. It's a huge turning point. It reveals what a mastermind Mystique is, that she is our greatest foe in the series, that Magneto is right, because the worlds are like aliens, UFOs, creatures from another planet, monsters, what are they? And Xavier's missing.
So that's a great cliffhanger. It's like, okay, everything's gone wrong for these guys. How are they going to get out of this, you know? So blowing up the mansion was not only a big visual, but it was like the icing on the cake for how bad things really got.
This is where we turn the world against mutants. And we enter the world the hardcore fans were dying to see.
What we wanted to do was strand our characters. They are now hated by the world, and they have no place to go. And that's where we wanted to leave them at the end of season 2.
This finale changed and defined our series forever. Nothing was ever the same.
We had an opportunity with the X-Men to retell them in a way that nobody had seen before. We got to explore new themes with these characters because they're teenagers in school.
They were going to a high school. They were dealing with foes at different periods in their lives. So the surrounding environment had changed, and it was finding how they would now grow in that environment. Not only are they teenagers, they're mutants. They're experiencing all the changes kids in our world do, and changes that we could never imagine.
It was a lot of fun to try and surprise the audience and to keep it all interesting and still dealing with all of the kinds of themes that you want to see when you're watching the X-Men.
Season 2 wrapped up with a very loud bang. The mansion had been destroyed. Mystique had replaced Professor Xavier. And the really big thing is that the world saw for the first time that there were superpowered beings in their universe.
At that point, there was no going back. I mean, we opened the Pandora's box for them. You could not return these guys to the life they had before.
In Season 3, we got to the real core of the whole X-Men world, the conflict between normal humans and mutants, and the prejudice that exists there, and how the mutants deal with that.
You don't belong here.
It's the crux of the entire argument between Magneto and Professor X. Can we all live together in peace, or is there going to be too much mistrust and prejudice and all of the things that Magneto feared?
Magneto is the one who's upholding the principles of Homo Superior, that the mutants will one day and should rule all of Earth.
He's seen the darkness of humanity, and he thinks that they can't change, so we have been given the abilities as mutants to strike back, and we should.
The Acolytes are Magneto's new band of bad guys that he has gathered together. They're people that he has recruited, and these guys are more powerful in a lot of ways than the other mutants that we've seen.
Magneto was sure these guys could bring him what he wanted, which was a war among humans and mutants. Because if that could be initiated, then Charles would have to pick the side of the mutants.
4 of us and 4 of you. Only we ain't afraid to use our powers.
Brotherhood are pretty much their own group. The unofficial leader really is Lance, our Avalanche. He's Scott Summers gone bad in X-Men Evolution.
Tell me, why are you such losers?
Because the X-Men are winners. It all balances out.
They're sort of the misfits, the juvenile delinquents that we all knew in school, you know, the bullies and the ones that like to push other kids around. But then again, they're not completely, totally evil either. You know, it wasn't like we got to go out and conquer the world or we got to do this or that. You know, it's just they just wanted to kind of be left alone and use their power for selfish reasons.
They do need a leader. They need somebody, and Mystique saw that in each of them. And when she collected them together, she knew if she could ever harness their abilities, that she would have quite a team.
For kids in the audience, it's the, wow, wouldn't it be great if I had a superpower? And yet the smart thing that Marvel did with their characters is to show that with those powers come limitations. The Morlocks represent the extreme side of not all mutancies are really good. And in the case of most of the Morlock characters, their mutancy was extreme to a point where they just didn't feel like they could go out in public at all.
They are the worst case scenarios for mutants. They're the ones who can't walk among us. So they live in the underbelly of the city, and it's a tough life, and they live in a very dark world.
Craig Kyle came to me with an idea for a character, and it was very intriguing. And Craig asked if there would be room in the schedule for an episode about it. And I said, absolutely. So he and a writing partner wrote an episode, and it was spectacular.
The X-23 is a young girl who's a clone made from Wolverine's DNA. And she's X-23 because she's the 23rd attempt to create the perfect fighting weapon, and she's the one that was the most successful.
She was raised in the program, never knew outside contact from humans or anything else, and it was a very dark world where she was raised, and so when she was given her first chance to escape, she wanted to confront the monster she blamed for her existence. She wanted revenge.
Finally, she gets face-to-face with Wolverine, and all of her anger is focused on taking him out. And we got to face off Wolverine and X-23 in a fight where we really got to dice up the landscape. And now she has gotten quite a fan base, and she'll be showing up on comic book store shelves. For the first time, we have actually spawned a comic book character as opposed to the other way around.
Apocalypse is introduced in the series, and he's the first mutant. He was the one born thousands of years ago, the fluke that started the evolution of our world in a sense.
Well, of course, the word apocalypse in and of itself tells you who the character is. Apocalypse means the end of the world. He's basically going to destroy all of human life and or try and mutate whichever aspects of human life are susceptible to mutation.
It would take the most powerful mutants of the day to stand together, to awaken him, to give him the strength to rise out of his coffin.
I tell you, it was kind of interesting to have one villain so powerful that he could beat Xavier, Magneto, and every X-Men that we have come to know. And boy, I tell you, it'd be pretty hard not to come back for season 4.